And action. Beth had a question about changing diet to take care of symptoms. And changing diet is part of the lifestyle change I try to recommend to my patients over 12 weeks, to at least to initiate lifestyle change. The problem is there's so many changes that you can make to a diet. There's so many authors that are out there that usually have this massive amount of followers, and they all work to a certain degree. But whether they're sustainable or not, Chris Gardner out of California did a nice study showing that of 4 very popular recipe books or authors, most of the time at the 12-month mark, patients fell off the wagon as far as maintaining a restrictive diet. So here's the idea. When I come up with putting together a personal plan for somebody, I've done it a couple of different ways, but I think the easiest way is to start out with a diet diary. So no matter who you are, even if you know what you're doing, I'd still say map out a 2-week diet diary, jot down everything you eat and drink for 2 weeks, and you can see in front of you, you become very accountable to this thing. It becomes very black and white. You can see where you have to fill in the holes, you can see where you have to take out some things, but it's very tangible. Versus just saying, I'm going to stop McDonald's. I mean, that's very good intention, but in the long run, if you don't kind of take out, subtract, put in, it makes it just, you're going to eliminate a whole bunch of things. You'll be drinking water, and that's not fun, not sustainable either. So 2-week diet diary, and then either, if you're my patient, bring it in with your next visit, fax it in, or bring it to your doctor. Or you can just, worst case scenario, be accountable to yourself, and you can see where the holes are, try to fill in the holes. Now, the next thing would be taking care of deficiency. A lot of times, Americans are lacking a lot of things. I can tell you off the top of my head, there's vitamin D that's lacking, especially if you're north of Georgia. B12, if you're on a proton pump inhibitor, and we'll talk about that in a second. Or if you're just a vegetarian, semi-vegetarian. Magnesium, I think, is lacking in a lot of us. Although the testing is a little tough, unless you do an RBC magnesium level. But usually it helps with sleep, it helps with anxiety, it helps with bowel movement and constipation. So just by symptoms, it's lacking. Iodine, I think, is lacking. Since the 90s, we stopped suggesting taking so much salt because of high blood pressure. And I think because we've decreased salt intake, we've also decreased iodine. And I think that's what's driving a lot of these thyroid problems, with women especially. Check out my video, DrRic tutorial, iodine and thyroid. You get what I mean. So just those alone, with a lot of kids or a lot of people who have irritable bowel syndrome, bloating, zinc is lacking, that too, copper. So there's a lot of things that can be checked. There's a lot of things that cannot be checked, like fiber. There's no test for fiber. I usually just have to look at that 2-week diet diary, go to the cholesterol, see if we need any fiber, and judge. 30 grams of fiber is what I suggest all the time, especially if you're on probiotics. You can't take probiotics and not do fiber of some sort. You'll cause problems, because probiotics and all those bacteria depend on a wide variety of fiber. So don't forget to do the fiber. And then omega-3 can't be checked unless you like SpectraCell, but that's a little pricey. I usually just go by inflammatory markers and cholesterol and assume that we got an issue. So those are the usuals that I would check for deficiency before we embark on a lifestyle change. If you have really high deductible and you can't afford that, just take them all. I think if your average American diet's lacking and you're going to assume just by statistics, I think you should take them. Now, that's going to be expensive, and you're not going to have a snapshot before you start treatment, but hey, because the side effects are low, I hardly have anybody that has high vitamin D levels or gets to toxic levels because the side effects are low. If it just launches you into this stardom of living a really healthy life, I'd say continue with it. Maybe after a while you can taper it off only if you have a really good diet that's grooving and continuous and sustainable, and you're exercising and your body weight's low. Then you can probably wean off of all the supplements, but I haven't seen that happen with a lot of my patients, myself included. I'd love to stop my supplements, but I've noted that when I stop a couple things, omega-3, turmeric, magnesium, all my symptoms come back. And I suffer from atrial fibrillation and fibromyalgia, so I do not want that back. I do not want to go to the ICU again. I want to feel better, and I want to feel like I'm 20 again, so I take all this stuff. I'm going to be 55. So that leads me to say, with diseases, usually medicines will control disease, but nutrition can also control disease. So For example, high blood pressure, I already mentioned iodine being low. Salt will manifest as hypertension, but sometimes other things like coffee, caffeine, spicy foods will also add to the hypertension, so you should be cutting that stuff out. So this is where we talk about diseases that you might have and the nutrition plan that you should be practicing. Arthritis, I usually say no milk or milk byproducts, sorry. Definitely no alcohol because it dehydrates. Definitely no coffee or caffeine because it dehydrates. Tea is fine. Matcha tea is great. It doesn't have any caffeine, but it is stimulating for those of you who have high blood pressure and can't sleep. For people with irritable bowel syndrome, I think it's important to be on a probiotic, to be on fiber. Those two have to go hand in hand. Also to be avoiding problems that would irritate the stomach, like coffee, caffeine, alcohol, spicy food, tomato, chocolate. Unfortunately, those are real great, but they also irritate the stomach. And if the stomach is the pacemaker for the rest of the digestive tract, you can't be on that stuff until you get a good groove and you're good. But sometimes gluten-free is also a practice that you should be considering, because although you might not be gluten allergic, I think wheat and gluten just add problems to the fire, and they are irritating. In addition to dyed foods and certain foods in the morning, I think that sometimes with people who have IBS or leaky gut, going on the FODMAP diet or practicing that will be helpful. I did a tutorial on that. See DrRic tutorial FODMAP and give you some ideas. Same thing with DrRic tutorial IBS number 2 and give you some ideas. So there are definitely certain foods that you should be avoiding in a nutrition practice you should be practicing if you have those issues. As far as depression, I think you should maximize on omega-3, good whole food, mostly plant-based dieting, and limiting the food, limiting the bad foods, the sweets, the refined sugars. All those things will cause a hormone response. And if you already have a hormone imbalance, you don't want to be jacking up your hormones back and forth. It will add to the problem. So, and there's enough literature that says omega-3 will be helpful for that. There are also other supplements that sometimes help. And this is where we get into adding supplements to your practice, like St. John's wort for depression, omega-3 like I talked about. For fatigue and a little anxiety, sometimes you can do ashwagandha, rhodiola, SAM-E. There's different things that also help with depression or mood disorder. So it is important to have a diagnosis made. It's also important to look for obvious deficiencies, and then we can layer up what kind of food you should be eating and what kind of practice. For people who just have plain old obesity or being overweight, well, sometimes getting on an elimination diet will be helpful. I think that's just a jump start. Fasting diets or intermittent fasting, I just had a video on that. It's important to have a jump start, but as far as whether you have to sustain that fasting diet or elimination diet, no, I just think it's always, if you can control the disease process, losing weight, and initiate a little bit of weight loss, then you can kind of maintain on something that's yummy, satisfying, and culturally comforting. So if you have to cook for other people in your family and you're on a FODMAP diet, nobody's going to be happy in your house. So we have to honor everybody else. They also have to honor you if you're in a flare-up too. So you can't be taking an elimination diet and then everybody's going to be asking for steak. That's going to be tough. So I think we have to compromise. So that's where the diseases come in handy. So medicines that you take sometimes will cause deficiency as well. And I like one of the fellows from the Arizona Center for Integrative Medicine put together MyTavin, MyTavin. And it's a nice website where you can plug in your medicine and then you can look for deficiencies. And most of the medicines are in there, like water pills cause sodium deficiency, potassium deficiency, chloride deficiency, calcium deficiency. So there are some medicines that you should check into, and once you know the medicines, once you know deficiencies, then your doctor can check. Or you can just go ahead and take the supplement, but it's tough when you're on medicines. You have to be cleared first by your doctor. So that is the way I would start out. And then after you've taken care of all that stuff, then it has to be you have to be mindful with your eating practice, which I always talk about. You can't just be gobbling down 5 times a day. You really should be timing it, and it should be hopefully a low glycemic index, high protein, and high healthy fat practice. If you're not sure about that, you can go to My Plate which is a government-run website that tells you about how to eat. The pyramid kind of didn't work, and I think it's backed up by the USDA, which I have my reservations on. But at least if you have a plate and you're used to portion size, you can kind of measure and be accountable to how many times a day you're supposed to eat. And that's where the fasting diet sometimes comes in handy as far as releasing insulin and not having it pipe up all the time, and making lipase kind of be secreted a little bit more readily so you can burn up those fat stores. Then we have finally nutrition to support exercise and proper sleep. So you have to have the protein intake, especially if you're indulging in exercise. You have to have the proper timing so you don't eat too much that reflux keeps you awake and or stimulates at night. Alcohol is always a nice thing to have, but I save it for feasts. And for those that take alcohol all the time, that's a lot of extra empty calories, and it also will affect your sleep habits. So I always like my patients to assume that they're training for athletic endeavor and try to train for that. Although my athletic endeavor is just try to get to 60 years of age in the next 5 years and without a hitch, hopefully. But hey, even if I don't make it, at least I did my best. And I lived the best life I could without any prescription medicine. So I'm having to live my life and be an example for my patients, and they're also being examples for me. So there's a positive feedback loop. I just hope that having this kind of mini tutorial will help, but really getting in the office with your doctor, with a registered dietitian, with a lifestyle coach will be the best thing. So you have to invest in that, and if you don't have anybody around you, then sometimes reaching out via this kind of format would be just as good. So Beth, good question. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea of where to start, where to go.